Subhanallah walhamdulillah wa la ilaha illallah. Subhanallah walhamdulillah wa la ilaha illallah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Listeners, you've tuned into Inspire FM and you are listening to the Quranic Reflection Show with your host Ammar Faz. And as usual, I'm here with Sheikh Noorud-deen Rashid, and we do have a special guest with us today. The guest we have today is Basit Mahmood, who's a graduate with a degree in politics and international relations from Cambridge. He's worked in the field of politics and before going to journalism and writing about politics, and at the moment he does so for papers like The Independent and The Huffington Post. And you may be thinking why we have Basit with us today, because inshallah today we'll be addressing the topic of religion and politics. So just to get this started, I'll ask Siddhi if you could just try and explain to the listeners why we're actually discussing politics and religion, two sometimes seemingly unrelated topics. So inshallah, if you could just shed some light on this, please.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wasallam. Rabbi yassir wa in yakir. So the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam said in a hadith which is in Sahih al-Bukhari as well as others, innamal a'malu bin niyyat. Indeed, actions are by intentions. So with regards to politics and political involvement, if a person has a good intention therein, insha'Allah ta'ala, wants to do good for the community, then insha'Allah, as long as it's done within the instructions of the Sharia and according to the guidance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, that person is going to get rewarded for political engagement, insha'Allah ta'ala. Whereas if a person does it in order to amass wealth, or in order to promote himself or herself, in order to increase their kind of fame or prestige amongst the people, then obviously there's not going to be any reward therein. And if a person does it in order to, وَنَعُوذُ بِاللَّهِ, as happens in many parts of the world, to usurp other people's wealth or to oppress people or to harm people, then no doubt this is going to have sin in it. So the point is, as long as the intention is correct and as long as one abides by the Sharia teachings, the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then there can be a great deal of good. What good am I speaking about more specifically? As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned repeatedly in the Quran, I will quote from Surah Ali Imran, ayah number 110, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, كنتم خير أمة أخرجت للناس تأمرون بالمعروف وتنهون عن المنكر وتؤمنون بالله. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, you are the best of nations brought forth for mankind, from mankind. You enjoin the good, you forbid the evil, and you believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I'll comment a little bit on this ayah of the Holy Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned, after saying that we are the best of nations, this nation, the followers of the Ummah of Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is the best of nations, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned three things: enjoining the good, forbidding the evil, and then believing in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the point is, when we enjoin the good or when we forbid the evil, it should be done in light of belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and recognizing that we believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So as I said before, that anything that we do as believers, as Muslims, must be in line with the guidance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with the revelation, in line with the revelation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So political involvement can absolutely be an important part of, and often a necessary part of, enjoining the good and forbidding the evil. Politics, when it's done right, or siyasa as we call it in Arabic language, when it's done right, can spread abundant good. And when it's done wrong, it can spread abundant evil. So for that reason, it's a means, it's a vehicle, it's a manifestation of spreading good or forbidding evil. So with this in mind, or from this perspective, in this context, it can absolutely be something, a force for good, insha'Allah ta'ala, if a person has a good intention and a person follows the guidance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger. This also reminds me of the hadith in Sahih al-Bukhari, where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, if one of you sees an evil, he must change it with his hand. And if he's unable to, then he must change it with his tongue. And if he's unable to, then he must dislike it in his heart, and that is the least of faith. So again, we have this same concept, this same understanding that as Muslims, as believers, as followers of the Prophet ﷺ, whenever we see something wrong, we want to try and make a change, inshallah ta'ala. And if we can change that with direct involvement or physically to get involved and change something, bismillah. And if it's verbally, bismillah, inshallah ta'ala. And I'm sure our guests will be speaking about all of these means and these aspects of making positive changes, inshallah ta'ala. But again, it's a manifestation of this, and it can be a very, very important vehicle to fulfill this prophetic imperative, the Prophet ﷺ gave us. A final thing I would like to say with regards to this, we have a hadith in many hadith books. I'll quote it from the Musnad of Imam Ahmad, where the Prophet ﷺ was asked, what is the best type of jihad? What is the best type of striving in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And the Prophet ﷺ said, kalimatu haqqin inda imamil jair. Okay, which translates as what? To say a word of truth in front of an oppressive leader. Imam is like a leader. Usually, obviously in a religious sense, Imam may be a religious leader. Okay, but here this is speaking about political leader or political authority or military leader, a person of worldly power. So the Prophet ﷺ spoke about this as being the greatest form of striving in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And obviously this can be in the context of political involvement. To stand up to power, to stand up to those who are oppressing or harming people, and to speak a word of truth. So in relation to all of these hadith and this ayah of the Holy Quran, no doubt political involvement can be a force for good if it's done correctly.
So before we move on to Brother Basit, just for my own understanding, so you mentioned about enjoining the good and forbidding evil. What I'm taking from this is that this applies to the general public good as opposed to just good for the Muslims. While that may be a noble thing,
yeah,
would you say it's also encouraged to seek out the good for everybody?
Yes, no doubt about it whatsoever. Imam al-Nawawi, rahimahullah ta'ala, when he commented on the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, none of you truly believes until he loves for his brother what he loves for his own self. He commented, this is your brother in humanity. No doubt, there's no doubt, when we speak about our deen, we should be clear about it. There is no doubt that the affection and the love and the care and the concern Muslims have for each other is going to be greater. Okay, this is the reality. This is part of the brotherhood in Islam. But that does not mean we shouldn't have love and care and concern for those who are not Muslim. Our Prophet ﷺ is the greatest example of this. He spent his life caring and concerning for his followers, or having concern for his followers, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but also for those who chose not to believe in him, those who chose not to follow him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He would give them sadaqah, he would give them protection, he would help them in all a manner of ways, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So yes, this is not simply for the Muslims, this is for all people, inshallah ta'ala. We want to extend good for all people, inshallah ta'ala, and never, anybody who understands the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala should never have the understanding that we want good for the believer and we want bad for the disbeliever. We want good for everybody, inshallah ta'ala. We want peace and tranquility and abundant rizq and comfort and guidance for every single human being on the earth, inshallah.
So Basit, coming on to you, the question really is, before we move any further, of what is politics, especially today as we know it within the UK and in our context?
So politics within Western European society and Western governments and governments all over the world at the moment as a discipline is the key word the brother used was a vehicle. And I think politics is a vehicle for within society for understanding how do we ensure every human being fulfills their potential, certainly in a secular context, irrespective of their race, religion, anything like that. It's all about how do they fulfill their potential and how do we divide resources and power within our society. So you have these big ideological debates and discussions about what is it, what course of action do we take for our society, how do our citizens fulfill their potential. So as you can see, it kind of affects everything, and we'll touch on to this later on as to why people should get involved, but it touches on to the financial situation, what's legal, what's illegal, what citizens are permitted to do, what they're not permitted to do. And what then becomes of politics as a system is you have different modes of government that you see across, not just in Britain, but across the globe. You see, especially in Britain, the idea of democracy. You have some different systems of government. You have monarchy. You have in Saudi Arabia, for example, absolute monarchy. You then end up with dictatorships in other parts of the world, like North Korea, where the ruling decisions in that system of government are made by one man. And then you have democracy on the other end, in which the people are held to be supreme, or the will of the people is held to be supreme. So you have all different kind of regimes, and it's a vehicle of trying to, some systems of government are obviously better than others, so democracy is obviously higher than dictatorship, and it's about making sure that the decisions undertaken by that, what we describe as the polis, have legitimacy and are in the interests of the citizens within that state.
Okay, so we've heard from Siddhi Noorud-deen how from the sources of the religion, from the Quran and the Hadith, how politics can be of benefit provided it's done with the right intentions to the Muslims and to the wider public, and that with the right intentions and within the laws of the Sharia we can engage with it to an extent. So as somebody who has been involved with politics and has studied it, can you explain to us why you feel Muslims should be involved, and how they can get involved as well on top of that, and what kind of influence this can bring about both at a national level and a local level as well?
Yeah. So first of all, any group in society, whether it's historically, any group that's facing stereotypes or discrimination or hardship of any sort, I think it becomes incumbent upon that group of people to become more involved in politics. And you see it with the growing levels of Islamophobia in the press. You've got headlines in the Sun newspaper, not just the Sun, Times, the Daily Mail. And when we talk about how people get involved in politics, what we've got to be careful about is, it doesn't have to become this narrow view politics. You don't have to necessarily become an MP. You don't have to necessarily become elected, and it's not just restricted to the issue of voting every 5 years. The other ways of getting involved in politics are through writing. You could become a journalist, and that's what it is, essentially a battle of ideas. You can get your ideas across through journalism, through writing letters to your MP. But I think more importantly through collective organisation. If you look throughout history, any change that's come about, any positive, meaningful change, you look at the Arab Spring, you look at civil rights activists in America, what they did was they mobilised and collectively they protested and made demands. And that's how they managed to get those changes. So certainly within Muslim communities, they should definitely get involved because of the increasing Islamophobia, and not just narrow it down to, I have to vote for once every 5 years. No, you can exert pressure and influences on kind of the decisions that are made. For example, the debates around banning hijab and all of this. If you're an organised group of people that can present your case across clearly and concisely, and you can also ensure other people join you in that struggle by keeping it broad, that's how you're likely to affect change, not only for your own benefit, but for wider society.
Right. Okay. So Siddhi, just bringing it back to the religious side of things. I mean, in terms of what our scholars have said, in terms of what the fiqh basically says about this, how can we get involved with politics? To what kind of extent? Obviously, voting is an obvious way of doing it. What have our scholars said about this? What have our scholars even said about, say, for example, somebody wants to start rallying to become an MP or what have you?
Khair, inshallah. Bismillah. So one thing I should mention, there's no point ignoring this. It's very important, and it's mentioned or spoken about by many of our scholars. Traditionally, there has been, not amongst all, but amongst many ulama or leading religious figures, an aversion, especially when it comes to political involvement, in the sense that one becomes a politician, if you like,
right,
or assumes some kind of role. We're not speaking so much about, kind of activism or raising one's voice or what have you, or speaking to those in power, but when we're speaking about becoming a person in power. And this has existed from more or less almost the very beginning, meaning after the passing of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. When we speak about the Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala anhum, they became obviously the political leaders and the political authority. But amongst the Sahaba, everybody had the concern. Nobody amongst the Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala anhum rushed to power. Even if we look at the first person who assumed political authority after the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anhu, it was done with a great deal of reluctance. Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu put him forward and said, and invited people to take bay'ah with him radiallahu ta'ala anhu. And when you look at his initial address, you see there's a reluctance there. He's not embracing it. He's not rushing towards this position of power. And many Sahaba were like that radiallahu ta'ala anhum. And some just outright refused. And they said, no, look, please, I don't want to be the governor of such and such a place. I don't want to be head of such and such thing. I just want to live my life, and I don't want any kind of political involvement in the sense, as I said, that you become a person within the system. However, I don't know of any situation, and nor would it be right to assume such a thing about the Sahaba, where they didn't voice their opinion when they disagreed with something. And this is part of what Brother Basit is saying, that this, it's not narrow in that sense that you have to become an MP or just necessarily vote. There are other means and there are other ways, and part of that is voicing one's concerns and speaking out and trying to influence and trying to affect decisions. So that no Sahabi stayed back. Whenever they disagreed with something, they would speak out, whether that was a religious decision or it was a political decision or what have you, they would all do so. Same with those who came after. And, many of our listeners follow the Hanafi madhab in terms of fiqh, and this is well known of Imam Abu Hanifa himself, the founder of the Hanafi madhab. It's well known and well documented in his biography, rahimahullah ta'ala, that he was even imprisoned and beaten because of his refusal to take a position within the political system. He was asked by the Abbasid Caliphate to become the Chief Justice, Qadi al-Qudat, and he refused. And he was repeatedly asked and he was repeatedly refused. And it's mentioned that this was one of the reasons he was imprisoned. Rahimahullah ta'ala. However, his own student, as I said with the Sahaba, there were many of them, obviously they did assume such roles. His own student and one of the great figures in Hanafi fiqh, Qadi Abu Yusuf, he accepted. And he did become Qadi al-Qudat. He's the student of Imam Abu Hanifa, looks up to Imam Abu Hanifa, but his analysis, his understanding, his ijtihad, as we call it in Arabic language, was different to that of Abu Hanifa. He felt that, assuming such a position, taking such a position, he can do a great deal of good. So the point is, yes, it is true that many of our scholars and many of our luminaries, religiously, spiritually speaking, they did avoid it. Why? Because power by its nature can be corrupting. When you become powerful, it can cause an element of corruption. There's that concern, and also there was traditionally the concern that when you get involved in politics, especially if you're not well versed in it, you're not very well educated in it, then you can very easily be manipulated. One of the major concerns has always been for religious figures to get involved in politics is compromises that you have to make. Seems to be the nature of politics, that you have to compromise within it. There's a matter of give and take very often, and there are certain things when it comes to the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala we cannot compromise. That which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said or has revealed is absolute. Those things where there's no direct revelation with regards to, yes, we have compromise and discussion and such things. So, there's always, traditionally there have been these concerns. So if you put that, in the context of what we're speaking about today, so when we're speaking about raising one's voice, or speaking out, I don't know of any position in our tradition as Muslims where anybody said, no, this is something you need to be concerned about or something you need to hold back with regards to. No, we should speak out the truth. And I quoted the hadith from Muslim Imam Ahmad at the beginning. Anyone should speak out, inshaAllah ta'ala. And also the hadith from Bukhari, when you see a wrong, then change it with your hand, and if you're unable to, then with your then speak out against it with your voice. Now, sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad, with your tongue, as the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said. So now to come to, sorry, I had to speak about that a little bit, it can't be ignored. But having said that, now with regard to specific legal rulings, when it comes to voting, the scholars I've either spoken to or, that I've read what they've had to say about this or what have you, and those I've been exposed to, the vast majority of them say, with regards to voting in a political system, they either say it's permitted, stroke encouraged, And some, albeit maybe a minority of them, they say it's an obligation. They consider it a religious obligation to do so. This is a minority of them. So, the vast majority were on this side of it. Either it's permitted stroke encouraged, it should be done inshallah ta'ala, or it's an obligation. Then some were of the opinion, or one or two were of the opinion that it's not permitted. So we have some difference of opinion, but what I would say is the vast majority of these ulama, contemporary ulama who are dealing with this issue or speaking about this issue, they encourage it or oblige people to vote. However, it should, what they said should be qualified as they qualified it. This is if it's done in a way or in a manner that benefits the community, benefits society. Not I want to vote for my relative. Not I want to, which happens unfortunately, or I want to vote for my friend, or if I don't vote for such and such, he's going to fall out with me. Yeah. This is not what they're speaking about. And even those who permitted it or even encouraged it, when it comes to this kind of voting, they may completely change their fatwa. And they may say, no, this is prohibited. And this is this is what many of them repeatedly said. They said, it's an amana, it's a trust. You have to do it in the right way. If you do it in the right way, fine. So this is important. We should qualify these things. If it's done with a good intention, with an intention of benefiting society, and especially the brother spoke about Islamophobia in society and such things, with these kind of things in mind, religious freedom for us and other religious communities around us, you need to have that religious freedom and flexibility, and you need to vote in a way which is going to forward that. And other things as well, economic justice and such things, so social justice and these kind of things. Those people and parties that are going to facilitate these things, yes, inshallah ta'ala, it's encouraged. And this is my position, the position I follow regarding this. I feel quite strongly about this. I do feel that Muslims anywhere in the world, and especially here, I know the UK better than any other part of the world, this is where I've been born and raised, especially here in the UK, should become involved politically. If they continue to become marginalized, things may get worse and worse. Not only for Muslims, but for society at large.
So, off the back of that, for you, Basit, you sometimes, I'm sure you've been involved, and you've probably heard this before as well, you sometimes hear the opinion of, what's the point of actually even getting involved with politics? Politicians are a bunch of liars, they don't enact anything we say anyway, it's all just a waste of time, let's just forget it and do our own thing, So somebody who's probably got a broader view of things, what would you say to that?
I think the best way to answer that is there was a quote from Malcolm X once, and while he was struggling for civil rights and fighting for equality for Muslims back then as well in the 1960s, 60s, he basically said that I've never been angry about something without doing something about it. Something along those lines that if you're angry about something, or if you think everybody else is doing something wrong, then get involved. Picking up on what the brother said, that otherwise you become marginalised, and people become. If you're not interested, that's why certain newspapers can get away making up certain headlines on Islamophobic headlines, because they know there's no kind of social cost to them. So if there may be lies, and again, it doesn't have to be. If you're angry about politicians, and try and change politicians' behaviour, become a writer or become an activist or organise even community charity. That's form politics, setting up charities and setting up social movements and action groups and pressure groups. Those things that you can also get involved in. So if you're not happy with what's going on in that sphere of politics with the MPs as such, then you can also do something else, because we have to kind of get involved now, because I unfortunately don't think Islamophobia is going to improve unless we do.
Right. I mean, so on the other side of that, you have people who are saying, we're seeing these injustices or things that are wrong, we want to get involved, and they're all fired up and they go and do something, but whilst being moderately uneducated about the subject, they end up doing something which, may be outside of the dictates of belief, or completely contrary to the religion and contrary to the laws of the land you're living in. So how can someone who wants to get involved ensure that they're doing it in the right way? So this is an open question, by the way. How can somebody ensure that they're doing this in the right way, in an informed way, and what are there any prerequisites that they should try and fulfill, try and satisfy before they jump on the activist bandwagon, say?
Yeah, if I begin and then have the final word on it, what I would say is that people, all Muslims, it's an obligation, as the Prophet ﷺ said in the Hasan Hadith in Ibn Majah and others, طَلَبُ الْعِلْمِ فَرِيضَةٌ عَلَى كُلِّ Muslim. Seeking knowledge is an obligation on every single Muslim. Okay? Especially in our context, not only just political, just generally in this society, we're constantly asked about Islam. We should be educated. We should know what Islam said regarding certain things. We are continuously misrepresenting our deen because we don't understand it ourselves. So that's what I would say right away, is that yes, anybody who's going to do anything in the name of deen or to support deen or what have you should be religiously educated, should have an understanding. And then the second thing I would say, and then pass on to the brother, is that in any field, be it politics, economics, medicine, any field, Islam teaches us to go to those people who specialize in those fields and have expertise in those fields, and take from them and benefit from them and seek guidance from them, inshallah.
That's it. The only thing I'd add is making sure that you know, with anything in life, before you jump into something headfirst, making sure that you read you're fully familiarized with the debates. There's nothing worse than going into a debate with someone that that you disagree with, and then realizing that you've not properly studied something, you're not properly aware of something. And at the heart of this whole discussion, for me anyway, is education and making sure people become more active and realizing how politics affects everything they do, even though they might not see it, how it affects literally everything they do, and becoming aware on the different ideological debates and how to bring about that change. So making sure they're aware and educated on these issues.
With that, I think we've run out of time. So, Jazakallah khair, Basit and Safir Sidi. Inshallah, join us again next time. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.